Towards the end of last week, I found myself in the middle of a social media firestorm, if you can believe it. Now, I'm not usually the sort of guy who makes people on the internet mad. In fact, I think this might be the first time in my life that such a thing has ever happened, but here we are. And on this occasion, I was trending on Twitter for a few days because of some comments I made about therapy, mental health, and depression. Now, to be clear, I was trending because all the people talking about it were basically talking about how wrong I was and what a terrible person I am. So I don't think I've ever trended because everybody's agreeing that I'm a nice guy. I'm not sure that it's possible to trend for that reason. It's pretty much guaranteed that if a lot of people are talking about you on the internet, they are mostly saying horrible things, which tells you something about the internet and about people in general, but that's beside the point. In this case, it all began when a guy named Matt Van Swol tweeted what he called a super hot take on therapy, which is basically that therapy is overrated, overused, and not nearly as effective as people seem to assume. This does qualify as a hot take on social media, but that's only because it's obviously true. And I agreed with it, as it is a point that I have made myself in great detail on this show several times over the past many months. I'm not going to get hung up on the therapy point here because I've made my case recently. And also I should be talking about it again with Jordan Peterson very soon. So looking forward to that. I will just mention this one response from a child therapist on TikTok who was offended by my therapy skepticism and decided to strike back by doing a little skit, imagining what it would be like if I was a therapist. So let's just watch that.
Hi, it's nice to meet me. I'm Matt Walsh. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I saw your Psychology Today profile. Is it true you can help me in only 5 minutes?
Yes, that's all the time I need to fix you.
Okay. You take insurance, right?
Of course, but only if they're owned by private equity. The government can't take away my right to choose your health care.
Great. Is it okay if I let you know what's going on?
Yeah, I've already started the meter, so you better make it quick.
Oh, okay. I'm lonely. I don't know how to make friends. Everyone keeps making fun of me, and I don't know how to talk to females.
Okay, stop whining. I know what you need to do. You're gonna want to write this down.
All right, great. What is it?
Stop it!
I think it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Just stop it. Stop looking like an idiot and make some friends.
Okay, so I should just stop it.
Stop being a weirdo.
I mean, I got to say the acting and writing could use a little bit of work, but other than that, pretty spot on. I mean, that is unironically not far from how my therapy practice would work if I had one. I don't know why he had his eyes closed the whole time, as the idea that I was falling asleep, which I probably would. I mean, honestly, if I was a therapist, I'd probably be fine. I'd be so bored listening to people come in and just whining, oh, sorry, I broke up with my girlfriend. Like, oh my God. I wouldn't make it through a day. I would not make it through a day as a therapist. But if I was a therapist, it'd be pretty similar to that. Although I'd probably model it more after this scene from an obscure HBO show nobody watched 10 years ago. But I like this one scene anyway, because this is what therapy would be like if I was doing it. Here it is.
So, I'm not the kind of therapist that pussyfoots around. I like to dig in fast and I give feedback. Stop fidgeting. What are you doing with your arm?
Nothing. I'm just nervous.
Put your hands in your lap. Focus. Sit up. Good posture sends positive messages to the brain. We're here to work. So, what are your issues? Give them to me.
Well, I am sad about this breakup I just went through.
She left you.
Yes.
And now you feel rejected and unlovable and you can't understand why she no longer loves you.
Yes.
You do know that she's not the only source of love for you in the world.
But I want her love.
We don't get everything we want in life. You don't get to have her love. That's it. End of story. Next issue.
Yeah, pretty much that. I mean, that's like, again, unironically, that would be good therapy. One of the big problems with therapy is that in its least effective forms, and the least effective form seems to be the most common form, it gives people a forum to whine and talk about themselves in a way that feeds the meter for the therapist and gives the client an excuse to be narcissistic and self-indulgent, but does not lead to action or change. In fact, the therapist is incentivized to not spark any lasting change because that would interrupt the cash flow. The fact is that for most people in therapy, the source of their problems is not some complex, deeply hidden trauma they need to, have years of discussion to identify and unpack. They don't need a licensed expert to help them find it. If you're like the average therapy patient, any random dude on the street could listen to you complain for 5 minutes and tell you exactly what your problem is. But if therapists give simple answers, again, they'd be out of a job. They need to keep you there and talking. That's the whole business model. But what a lot of people really need is to be told exactly what you heard in that clip, which is, this is the way things are, this is life, you can't always get what you want, deal with it, stop complaining, move on. I mean, that is the answer to like 99% of the emotional complaints that you have. If your life is all screwed up, it's probably because you're making bad choices. Not definitely, but probably. The answer is to stop making those choices. And if you don't stop making them, your problems will continue. And someone could tell you, like, stop doing that. That's what's causing the problems. But I don't want to stop doing it. Okay, well then your problems are going to continue. Like you could stop doing it, or you could keep doing it. It's up to you. No one can force you. And that's all that there really is to be said about it most of the time. And if your life is screwed up for reasons you truly can't control, then in most of those cases, all you can do is accept what has been done, accept the reality for what it is, and keep moving. Now, I will admit there probably is a gender difference here that often gets lost in the shuffle when we discuss this issue. What I'm saying applies to people in general, but probably more to men in particular. The source, because the reason is that a source of a woman's emotional struggle is often that she doesn't feel understood, right? And talking to a therapist who understands you, or is paid to pretend that they understand you anyway, might have some utility in some circumstances. But the source of a man's struggle most of the time is that he feels like he has no control. He feels like he's lost his power, his vigor, his vitality, or like he never had any to begin with. And the last thing that he needs, if that's his issue, and I think it is for most men, the last thing he needs is to sit around talking and complaining and harping on the fact that his dad didn't come to his t-ball game when he was 5 or whatever. For him, the best thing he can do is take action, do something, get moving. But as I said, we can continue that conversation another day. This led, after a couple of steps, into a discussion about depression. And somebody insisted that I could only have this opinion about therapy because I've never experienced depression. And I explained that, well, literally every human on earth has experienced depression to one extent or another. I was then told that, well, there's a, quote, monumental difference between being sad and depression. And I asked for someone to offer a definition of being sad that is monumentally different from depression. And then from there, we were off to the races. This request on my part was apparently deeply offensive. Some people did attempt to actually answer the question, which I appreciate, but many others responded with rage and histrionics and various accusations and insults and all the other things you might expect. I'm a terrible person. The Daily Wire should fire me. I shouldn't be speaking about this subject unless I have a degree in the relevant field. My opinions are dangerous. People are going to die because I tweeted about depression. I'm ignorant and cruel and callous, and et cetera and so forth. That was the general message from the outraged masses. So let me make a few points that will hopefully tie all these things together. And first, to answer my own question, there is a difference between sadness and depression, but it is one of degree, not of kind. Depression is a deep, persistent sadness. It's like the difference between being hungry because you skipped lunch and being hungry because you haven't eaten in 2 days. They're both forms of hunger, but one is more severe and more debilitating than the other. But it would not be accurate to say that there's a monumental difference between starving and being hungry. Starving is being hungry. If somebody dies of starvation, it would not be inaccurate to say they died from hunger. In fact, people do say that. So it's just a matter of degree. And the same is true of sadness and depression. Depression is sadness to a much greater degree. Now, it seems like there's no reason why this point should make people so angry that they call for me to be deplatformed and fired from my job, but that's what happened. The reason that it gets this reaction is because most people are programmed to lash out at anyone who says anything that appears to fall outside of the orthodoxies and teachings of the psychiatric industry. Even people who otherwise pretend to be skeptical of the expert class, people who, in any other context, would not throw around the trust the expert line, okay? People who, when it comes to vaccines or anything else, they'd be the first to say, I don't care what the experts say, okay? The experts are wrong. But when it comes to issues like mental illness and depression and ADHD and anxiety and so on, many of those same people completely change their tune. The skepticism vanishes and is replaced by a blind trust in the people who have declared themselves the sole authorities on all issues having to do with human thought and emotion. So don't trust the experts, except for the experts who claim to be the expert on the human condition itself. I mean, those we can trust absolutely and follow with total obedience. That appears to be the idea. And I think the public also wants to believe that depression is inherently fundamentally different from sadness, as opposed to being different by degree and severity. Because sadness is obviously not a disease. Yet those experts say that depression is a disease, and millions of people are very invested in seeing it that way. They want depression to be a disease. It seems kind of odd to say that. Like, it's odd that people would want to have a disease, but they do. Like, most of the people that would say they're depressed, if you tell them it's not a disease, they react. It's not just that they disagree. They react with pure rage at the thought because they want to have a disease. They do. And if you suggest that it may be something other than a disease, they become, again, very upset. They'll even say that if you deny that depression is a disease, then you are denying that depression is real. In fact, if you go to Twitter right now and you were to go search for this, you're going to find a whole bunch of tweets from various people saying, Matt Walsh thinks depression isn't real. Matt Walsh, sometimes I'll put it in quotes. Matt Walsh, depression is fake. Like, I never said that. This is just making up quotes, but that's what people do. Because for some reason, this distinction is like really hard for people to grasp. Okay? Depression is not a disease, but it is real. That's the little nuance here. In my opinion, thanks to the psychiatric industry, what we're dealing with is a giant category error. And at this point, they have taken nearly every negative emotion, experience, behavior, and categorized it as a disease. And in many of these cases, the categorization makes no sense. But that doesn't mean that the emotion or the experience or the behavior isn't real or doesn't exist. So, for example, one of the many clinical mental diseases that psychiatrists have come up with to explain misbehaving children is something called oppositional defiant disorder, which is a disorder characterized by a child acting oppositional and defiant. Now, it's definitely true that some children, many children even, all children to some extent, do behave in oppositional and defiant ways. That is very real. No one is denying the existence of opposition and defiance. And sometimes that kind of behavior can be severe and have extremely bad consequences. But it's not a disease. Diabetes is a disease. Liver cancer is a disease. Parkinson's is a disease. These are illnesses that can be detected structurally in the human body. You can find them in the actual cells of the human body. You can find them without even talking to the patient at all. Okay, so this is not doing a survey and they tell you things and then you go looking for certain chemical things in the brain. No, they could not even talk to you and run tests and find the disease without you saying a word to them. But a child's defiant behavior is not a structural illness of the human body. Guess what? They could run a test on every single child in the world and they will not find anything that they could call, oh, there it is. There's oppositional defiant disorder. They've got it. Cannot happen. Why is that? Because it's not a disease. They've made it up. They've invented this disease. That's why they don't do blood tests to diagnose it. It's an unwanted behavior. Unwanted behavior is not a disease. Now, one of the newer inventions of the psychiatric industry is something called prolonged grief disorder. This is a disease, quote unquote, that can be diagnosed if a person is very sad after losing a loved one and those feelings of sadness persist for more than a year. Now, I would say with great confidence that this is a fake disease. Is grief fake? Is Matt Walsh denying that grief exists? Am I claiming that if you lost your spouse that you're not really grieving them? No. What I'm saying is that you don't have a disease. Is grief very serious? Is it something that deeply impacts a person's life? Can it lead even to self-destructive behavior and suicide in extreme cases? Yes, on all counts, but it's not a disease. The psychiatric industry has once again taken a normal human experience and medicalized it, turned it into a thing that you can prescribe drugs for. And in order to do so, they have come up with completely arbitrary guidelines and parameters. Who says that grief is only supposed to last 12 months? Who decided that? Who the hell put psychiatrists in charge of deciding how long you should be sad after your wife dies? Who the hell is this person to sit there with their little notepad and say, well, it's been 13 months, it's too long, you have a disease? What? And most people just accept that. And not only do they accept it, but it's like they don't understand why some of us criticize it. It blows my mind. The whole idea is absurd. I mean, it's outrageous. It's insulting. But this is what these people have done. They've done it with, again, the entire human condition. Every difficult human emotion or experience has been arbitrarily and entirely subjectively categorized as a clinical problem. And if you think I'm making that up, you can find the DSM, you can find it online, you could go through it, and I guarantee you, literally every negative emotion has multiple diseases for it. Try me if you don't believe me. And this is what has happened with depression, in my view. Depression is real. It is serious. I do not believe that it is a disease, however. Okay? Depression is despair, which itself is, again, essentially a much more persistent, deeper, more encompassing sadness. I prefer the word despair. So despair, I submit, is not a disease because it is a completely natural, even fundamental aspect of the human experience. One of the parameters that is supposed to separate clinical despair from non-clinical is that we are told clinical despair, depression, often has no discernible cause or reason. And I heard this from a lot of the people that, when I asked that question and people were freaking out and were angry, of the people who were not freaking out and were trying to give a reasonable answer, which I appreciate, many of them said this. They said something like this, that well, when you're sad, there's like a reason something happens. But when you're depressed, there's no reason. It's just there. It's like this cloud that follows you. If somebody's very sad because they lost their job or a family member died or something, that's not clinical depression, I'm told. Though as we've seen, the psychiatrists still have a clinical disease and a bottle of pills even for that, but it's not depression. Depression has no immediate external cause. So if everything seems to be fine in your life and yet you feel this deep, persistent despair, you are clinically depressed. And you should probably be on drugs. That's the idea. But here's my point. And this is after 50 minutes of rambling, this is my point. This is what I'm trying to say on this subject. There is no such thing as despair, depression, felt for no reason. That is a misnomer. So if somebody says, I feel depressed for no reason, no, they don't. There is a reason. And I would argue that simply being a human, having a mind, living as a conscious being on this planet full of death and suffering, the very fact of being sentient, of being aware of yourself and your place in the world is reason enough to feel despair. There's nothing necessarily irrational or surprising, certainly nothing clinically diseased about struggling to see meaning or purpose in life or having no motivation or feeling empty. These are all rational and understandable responses to our condition as conscious, self-aware beings. That doesn't mean people should feel that way or that we should abandon people to those feelings and not try to help them. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't seek help. It doesn't mean that you should be content with your despair. It doesn't mean any of that. My only point is that the despair is rooted in something deep, the deepest thing of all. It is a product of being human, which means that though it is real and though it is painful and though it is very serious and very hard, it is not the same sort of thing as malaria or typhoid fever. It is not a disease. Yes, getting malaria and typhoid fever are also things that can happen to people, but they are not a product of the human condition itself. They are an aberration. That's what makes them a disease. They don't come from your very humanity like despair does. Now, philosophers and theologians and thinkers through the ages have had a lot to say about the problem of despair and how we should cope with it as human beings. Only in very recent time did we decide that we should put it into the same category as physical illness and treat it the exact same way. And I would argue that this strategy, along with being rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of depression and of the human condition itself, has been an abject failure. We have been treating depression as a disease for decades, and you tell me, generally speaking, has it worked? Have people become less depressed? Have people become more able to function? Has suicide rates gone down? No. No and no are the answers to those questions. In fact, as we diseasify and medicalize all of these difficult human emotions, what we find is that year over year, the problems get worse. Suicide becomes more common. people become less able to cope with the challenges of life. The strategy isn't working. And it isn't working because it's based on a lie. And it's a lie that makes people feel powerless. That it, in fact, trains people to take comfort and seek respite in their powerlessness. If your feelings are a disease, then you can't do anything about them. You can't conquer them on your own. You are helpless against them. That's been the message for decades. And for decades, we have paid an unimaginable price because of it. So I am suggesting that it may be time to stop, just for a moment, analyze some of these basic presuppositions of the modern psychiatric field. Realize how totally at odds they are with the insights of virtually everyone who lived on Earth up until the existence of modern psychiatry. Realize that this is a field that has been extremely disastrously wrong about a lot of things. And I believe that this is one of those things. It's perhaps the main thing it is wrong about. And that's all I'm trying to say. And I will keep saying it, no matter how angry people are about it. I believe you're directing your anger in the wrong place. I'm not the one who has been tasked with solving a problem that I have only made progressively worse for the last 60 years. That's the psychiatric industry. And it's why that industry is today, once again, finally, canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching.